Hi, I'm Tom with a list of interesting things. Today on the list of interesting political things, with only 9 days to go before the 2020 election, we're going to do another freeform predictions video. This one is going to be our second of 3 on the U.S. Senate. We're going to go over the Senate races that are up this year, discuss the spiciest, and give a prediction on the Senate composition next year in 2021. Before we start, please bear in mind that if you hear any Coldplay in the background, don't worry, it's not real and it can't hurt you. Let's dive in and start with some context in case anyone missed the last Senate video. The U.S. Senate is a body of 100 people, each elected for a 6-year term. The terms, however, are staggered. So it's not 100 senators up every 6 years, but rather about a third of the Senate up every 2 years. There are 65 Senate seats not up for election this year, 30 Republican, 33 Democrat, and 2 Independent, who generally caucus with the Democratic Party, so it's safe to say that there are 35 Democratic seats not up when talking about majorities. The Democrats are at a disadvantage when it comes to the Senate, currently holding the minority at 47 to 53, so if they want a majority next year, they'll have to win 4 seats. Let's see if they'll be able to, or if the Republicans will hold the Senate for the 10th year running. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me as I start to characterize some of these safe states. We're going to go ahead and hit Oregon. Virginia will hit Illinois. As we know, Chicago is pretty big. If we take a look, there's really not a chance of Dick Durbin losing. There's really not a chance at all when you look at those projected vote totals. We'll go and hit Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Joe Biden's home state of Delaware. We'll go ahead and switch over to the safe Republican states. We'll hit Idaho, Wyoming, and it's really the same thing. If we click over here and take a look at Wyoming, there's really not a chance of the Democrat winning here, not with a projected vote margin of 70-30. We'll go ahead and hit South Dakota, Nebraska, skip over Kansas and hit Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, skip over Kentucky, and hit West Virginia. We're going to move right on to the likely Democratic states. There's only 3 right now, no change from last time. We'll hit New Mexico, New Hampshire, and Minnesota, all very safe Democratic seats. We'll go ahead and take a look at Minnesota for an example. As you can see, Tina Smith has a 92% chance at victory. Projected vote share has her up by 12. No poll has seen any shift in that, really. There have been a couple, I should say, there have been a couple that have shown it as close, but I think it's pretty safe to say that that's going to be likely for the Democratic Party. We'll go ahead and move on to the likely Republican Party. We'll click on Texas. Now, Texas is an interesting one. In spite of some really quite impressive groundswell Democratic support in Texas, especially this year, I just don't think that MJ Hagar has a chance at winning in any realistic sense. It doesn't seem to me that that groundswell of support has extended to this race. MJ Hagar just hasn't been getting the money that John Cornyn hasn't been getting the popular support, and MJ Hagar hasn't really gotten that kind of support that we've seen a lot of other Democrats in Texas getting this year. Now, that doesn't mean that MJ Hagar is guaranteed to lose, but if MJ Hagar does win, I would imagine that groundswell of support against Trump that we've been seeing in Texas this year will be much of the reason. The problem being that John Cornyn has taken steps, especially in the last month or so, to distance himself from the president, and I think that plays to his advantage. Moving right along, we're going to click on Mississippi, the home state of the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, and Alaska. Now, Alaska is another fairly interesting one. I love Alaska in the current political climate. There has been this meme circulating around the internet. It's something to the effect of "Don't sleep on Alaska." We might come back to this some other time, but I think we're going to leave it as likely Republican for right now. But the polls have not been a blowout for the Republican. They've narrowed to about 6.5 points, down from about 10. And the problem is the polls have been all over the place. There's a real lacking in quality polling in Alaska because it's so far out of the way, and it is generally considered by most to be unlikely to flip. You'll notice that we could change that in the next couple of weeks. I should say in the next week. There's only 9 days to Election Day. But in our last prediction video, we might change it if there is a real shift in where the polls are looking, or a real shift in where the fundraising is looking. But for right now, I think it's pretty safe to keep it right there. So that is it for the likely states. As you can see, there's still a ton of uncharacterized states. We're going to hop right into the lean blue, and this is going to be our first change in characterization. We're going to click on North Carolina. If we take a look at North Carolina's projection, I think it's pretty safe to say that Cal Cunningham is going to come out on top. The polls have been pretty consistent, and even with that sexting scandal a couple weeks ago, Cal Cunningham has been performing very well. Now, it is only lean Democrat. In no way does that mean that it's a done deal. But I think that it's safe to move that out of the really hot contest area and move it into the probably going to the Democrat area. We're also going to click on my boy, noted astronaut Mark Kelly. Noted astronaut Mark Kelly is the most exciting race to me on this entire map. Because, as I have mentioned once or twice, he is noted astronaut Mark Kelly. He is noted man who's been in space, Mark Kelly. He is noted man absolutely steamrolling, really solid candidate Martha McSally. Current incumbent Martha McSally has her name really popularly known in Arizona, Martha McSally, by a margin of consistent 5 points over the course of the year. I think that Mark Kelly is going to take this race. The polls seem to bear that out. There's only one poll. There's only a couple polls that have it even close. I think it's really safe to say that Mark Kelly's going to come out on top because it's going to be a pretty tight margin since Arizona is a traditionally Republican state. I think we're going to leave it as lean, and I'm pretty confident it's going to stay as lean unless something really impressive happens in the next couple of weeks. In the next couple of days. But I think that the Democrats are probably going to take this one. We're also going to give Colorado to the Democratic Party. This is John Hickenlooper. John Hickenlooper versus Cory Gardner. Cory Gardner is the incumbent, but there's been a large shift in popularity away from Cory Gardner, sort of the inverse of what has been happening in the states where people have been distancing themselves from Donald Trump a little bit. In Colorado, Cory Gardner has really doubled down on his support of the president, and that, I think, in opposite to what we were discussing before, I think that this has been playing to John Hickenlooper's benefit. Hickenlooper is a fairly popular former governor. He ran for president in the 2020 Democratic primaries, and he's been performing very well. I think it's pretty safe to say that this is going to go for the Democratic Party. Not by huge margins, but by comfortable ones. We're also going to click on Michigan, and we're also going to click on Maine. Maine is an interesting one that I've considered moving into the tilt column in favor of the Democratic Party. As you can see, it's pretty close, but I think that it's probable that Sarah Gideon is going to pull out a win here. This is Susan Collins, the incumbent up in Maine. This has been sort of a contentious race, and she's been sort of a contentious candidate. She's a 4-term incumbent, but she has seen a drop in popularity that has been very significant recently, in sort of the same way that Cory Gardner has. She has really come out in favor of the president. She came out in favor of the Kavanaugh appointment. It's looking like she's going to come out in favor, like she's going to vote in favor of the Barrett confirmation. I believe that's just 2 days from now, if I recall correctly. Republicans in the Northeast are often quite moderate, and they don't always caucus with their national colleagues. And I think that that's why Gideon is probably going to take this. As you can see, there was a big flip in the middle of the year, in the middle of the season, I should say, and I think that Gideon's probably going to pull this one out. We could see it tighten, but I think that she's probably going to pull it out. Moving on to the lean red states, of which there is only 2, I believe. The easy one, just like last time, is going to be Alabama. Alabama, traditional Republican stronghold, has Doug Jones. Doug Jones Doug Jones, Democrat, running for re-election. He won in kind of a contentious special election in, I believe, 2017 against incumbent Roy Moore. Roy Moore had some very serious pedophilia and sexual assault allegations come out against him, and Doug Jones really rose to the occasion to take that seat. But even so, he only took that seat by a tiny margin. There is not that same sort of... it's not the same race by any means this year. Tommy Tuberville is a very popular candidate. He is a former college football coach. He has a lot of money and a lot of support. I think he's a really solid candidate. I'm about as confident in Tommy Tuberville as I am in noted astronaut Mark Kelly. I think that because he has been so popular for so long, I think he's probably going to take down Doug Jones, incumbent from Alabama. And I think we're also going to click on Kansas. Some people are going to argue with me about this, saying that Kansas is closer than I think it is, but I really don't think that is borne out. Barbara Bollier has managed to tighten the race against Roger Marshall, but not, I think, by enough to really have a significant chance at winning. It's exciting, but what's notable about this race is that the Republican is only up by 5 points. That's extremely significant. You would never expect a Republican to be up by mid to low single digits here. But this is the world we live in, and this is one of the pieces of evidence that people point to when they say that this could be a huge blue year for the Dems. It's also worth noting that just like Alaska, there's not a huge amount of quality polling that goes on in Kansas. There's a bit, but not an incredible amount because it's usually such a safe state. The Siena College polls have Marshall up by 4, but that's only 1. Most of the other ones are not great pollsters, and as you can see, there's not been a lot of great polling recently. The 3 polls that we have in the month of October are all over the map. +4, even, and +12. I think that this could be, I say hesitantly, could be evidence of a shift in Kansas in the next decade or two to the left, like we saw in Virginia a few years ago, which is now a very solid Democratic seat, and like we're seeing in North Carolina and Arizona and Texas now, just that gentle shift toward the left. All right, as we start the tilt states, we're going to start in the Southeast. We are going to begin with South Carolina. Now, South Carolina, I think, is like one of the most exciting races on the map this year. Jamie Harrison has gotten tons of money, just tons. And the race has narrowed up considerably, and as Graham's popularity has begun to drop. Now, Graham has really beefed up his fundraising numbers so that he isn't quite on par, but he is performing much better than he was when the race started to tighten a few weeks ago. So I think that it is still very likely going to go to the Republican Party, but not by much. I think that it's going to be a very narrow race. And I think the same thing can be said of Montana. This is another change in characterization from our last map. If we take a look at Montana, we can see that this is actually a pretty tight race. In the Battle of the Steves, Steve Bullock has really been pulling things out. Look at how much this race has tightened in the last couple of weeks. Only up by 3 points is the Republican Steve Daines. I think that Bullock has a real shot here. I still think that it's going to go to the Republicans. I think it's going to be by a decisive margin, but by a very small margin. Finally, we have Georgia. We're going to take a look at the Georgia general election first. As we can see, David Perdue is up by a fair margin. Not an unassailable margin, but a fair margin. I think that it's safe to call this in the same way that we're calling Montana. It's going to be tight, but unless John Ossoff's support really grows a bit, or unless we see Democratic turnout at record levels, I think that this is probably going to go to David Perdue. We're going to move on now to the true toss-up states. We'll start with Iowa. Iowa is really, really tight, and it has been for some time now. Less than a 2% margin no matter which way you slice and dice it. This is an incredible race. I think that I am going to do something that might be contentious with some people as we're looking at this, but based on the polls in October, the polls recently have Greenfield up by a healthy margin, and I think that I am going to call this tilt for the Democratic Party. And I don't think that too many people are going to be upset about that, but I'm sure that some people are going to say that as this is a traditional Republican state, and as Donald Trump is gently favored here, that it is probably going to go for the Republican. But I think that in this case, it has been so tight for so long, I think that the snapshot that we see at the end is going to be the one that is most telling. I think this is going to go for the Democratic Party. Finally, we have the Georgia special election. And this I think is the one that I'm going to strongly disagree with the polls on. I think this is going to be the only truly contentious call that I make right now. If we take a look here, right around here, polls started to change the way they were asking questions. They stopped asking who your favorite candidate is, and they started asking who you would most likely vote for. They started doing one-on-one matchups, I should say. So one-on-one matchups between Warnock and Loeffler, and one-on-one matchups between Warnock and Collins, and one-on-one matchups between Lieberman and Warnock, and Collins and Loeffler. Now, I know that this looks a little weird, but for anyone who is not familiar with the way this is working out, this is going to be called this is going to be what's called a jungle primary. A jungle election, There are 5 candidates in the race, and if no candidate gets 50% on election day, then the race will go to a runoff, which is what's denoted by these stars here. Most of the polls right now are showing that if it goes to a runoff and Warnock is in that runoff, Warnock will win. Not by a huge margin, but by a very comfortable margin. I think that this will not happen, and let me tell you why. Traditionally, Democratic turnout, and in particular young Democratic turnout, gets supercharged for presidential elections. But it wanes slightly in off years, and it wanes significantly in special elections. I think that this will happen. I think that if the runoff takes place on the 5th of January, like it is scheduled to, if it is forced to be a runoff, the older population, which are predominantly Republicans, will stay engaged. But many, not most, but many of the younger Republicans won't turn out. If that happens, I think this race will go red. Not by a huge margin, but I think that it will go red. I could be wrong about that. But in spite of the incredible supports Democrats have had in Georgia, I think that when all is said and done, we will see 2 Republican senators in this state. So that's my newest official prediction, 51-49 in favor of the Democrats, with a lot more uncertainty than last time. I'll update our prediction one more time before the election for both this and the presidential model, and when I do, there should be a lot more specificity as polls pour in the last weeks before the election. The last week, I should say. Everything this year is teetering on a razor's edge, and I could not be more excited. Please don't forget to vote. There are links in the description as always. Please remember that your absentee ballot request or voter registration deadlines are likely fast approaching, so get ready, make a plan, and don't forget to vote. I encourage you to subscribe to stay up to date on all the most interesting things. I'll be making continued election predictions for the next week, and we start getting voting data on those vote margins as the races change rapidly. So check back for those. Until next time, be like the 2020 Senate elections. Be crazy and exciting and extraordinarily complicated, and be unpredictable. And above all, be interesting. See you next time.